This is part 2 of Federalist 47. I'm going to start all over from beginning of paragraph 3, and I'm going to read this to you. One of the books that I have mentioned before is this one. J.R. Pohl has an edition of the Federalist Papers, which is really good. It has good notes. The print size is good. Sometimes I use that to read. And he's got this one that he has included some of the important anti-federalist papers. Like here, the beginning of 47, as you noticed, he said some of our adversaries, and for the first time, he is kind to their adversaries. He's talking about Brutus, one of the important anti-federalist writers. So you can find some of those writings in this book, or there is collections of them available in other books. Like I have said before, I have encouraged you to look at different editions of Federalist Papers, look at the introduction, see what the scholars say. Also, this has an introduction, this one, which would be well worth your while reading. Okay, I'll start with paragraph 3 again. Remember, the whole idea here is separation of powers, which will gradually, talking about it, preserving separation of powers, stopping a tyrant from taking over, whether it's one person or a group of people act like tyrants. We don't want that to happen. And then a rule of law. That's the most important part that we talked about. What kind of law? A law that applies to everybody, rich and poor. A law that's declared, that's open knowledge, available to everybody to understand. So those are the most important things that you want to think about as we read this paper and go through Federalist 51, because these are very important. No political truth is certainly of greater intrinsic value or is stamped with the authority of more enlightened patrons of liberty than that on which the objection is founded. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Were the federal constitution, therefore, really chargeable with this accumulation of power, or with a mixture of powers having a dangerous tendency to such an accumulation, no further arguments would be necessary to inspire a universal reprobation of the system. I persuade myself, however, that it will be made apparent to everyone that the charge cannot be supported, and that the maxim on which it relies has been totally misconceived and misapplied. In order to form correct ideas on this important subject, it will be proper to investigate the sense in which the preservation of liberty requires that the three great departments of power should be separate and distinct. So we agree that the executive department, the judiciary, and the legislative have to be separated. He says distinct. He's saying that some of these people say they have to be separated totally, 100%. But as we go along, you'll see that he says, no, there should be a partial agency. In other words, one department can somehow influence or watch over the other department. Because if you have them 100% separated, it will not work. You won't be able to have the rule of law. and he'll gradually tell us why. The oracle who is always consulted and cited on this subject is the celebrated Montesquieu. If he be not the author of this invaluable precept in the science of politics, he has the merit at least of displaying and recommending it most effectually to the attention of mankind. Let us endeavor, in the first place, to ascertain his meaning on this point. So he gives great credit to Montesquieu. And he says he's someone that we should be familiar with, should be looked up to. As a matter of fact, they mention his name more than any other political philosopher, at least in the Federalist Papers. We know that John Locke was very influential on all the founders. And then I have mentioned people like David Hume and Scottish Enlightenment philosophers in the past, but they don't talk about them that much during the writing of the Federalist Papers, so keep that in mind. The British Constitution was to Montesquieu what Homer has been to the didactic writers on epic poetry. Homer, one of the greatest epic poets, was Greek, and he was looked up to by other poets as an example. So he says, Montesquieu looks at the British system as other poets looked at Homer's work. As the latter have considered the work of the immortal bard as the perfect model from which the principles and rules of the epic art were to be drawn, and by which all similar works were to be judged, so this great political critic appears to have viewed the Constitution of England as the standard, or to use his own expression, as mirror of political liberty, and to have delivered in the form of elementary truths the several characteristic principles of that particular system, that we may be sure then not to mistake his meaning in this case. Let us recur to the source from which the maxim was drawn. It says, okay, we accept Montesquieu's work is great. He looked at the British system. We think the British system is a great system. Let's just go ahead and see what he exactly is saying about the British system. Then we'll discuss that. On the slightest view of the British Constitution, we must perceive that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments are by no means totally separate and distinct from each other. The executive magistrate forms an integral part of the legislative authority. He alone has the prerogative of making treaties with foreign sovereigns, which, when made, have, under certain limitations, the force of legislative acts. All the members of the judiciary department are appointed by him, can be removed by him on the address of the two houses of parliament, and form, when he pleases to consult them, one of his constitutional councils. One branch of the legislative department forms also a great constitutional council to the executive chief, as on another is invested with the supreme appellate jurisdiction in all other cases. The judges, again, are so far connected with the legislative department as often to attend and participate in its deliberations, though not admitted to a legislative vote. So he's going to look at what Montesquieu has written, And he's going to say, look, even if you go with what Montesquieu has said, these departments are not distinct. These branches are not distinct, even in England. They have partial agency. In other words, one department can control an aspect of what the other department does. And he's going to say that in this new constitution, we have made that form also, that is in this constitution also. Because if we don't do that, there won't be the rule of law. We won't have the rule of law. We'll have possibly one person or group of people that will accumulate power and violate your rights. And we have thought of that. We've found the cure for it, and we have put it in this new constitution for you. And that's why we want you to ratify it. One of the reasons that I'm actually sitting here and reading this in front of you is because, again, I want to encourage you as somebody who hasn't read this before, somebody who's an immigrant, an English language learner. It's very important that you read along the first time.